No, it's fine. I improvise. Welcome, everyone. We are so glad that you're here today. For those of you who do not know me, I am Kathy Dwyer. It is my privilege and joy to serve this congregation as its senior pastor, and it is my privilege and joy to call this woman to my left my colleague and friend. And it is such a fantastic thing to have something to celebrate today. We are so thrilled with your book launch, Laura. Congratulations to you. We're looking forward to the celebration that goes on this afternoon. So welcome. Here's kind of what we have in mind. I get to ask some questions, which will be really fun. And after I've asked a few questions of Laura and we've conversed a little bit, we'll open it up to questions from all of you, or if you're watching from home and you have a question, you can text. Jared, can you throw that number up on the screen again? We have a number that you can text a question to. Betsy Thomason will be running around with a microphone to get your questions in here, and I'll be monitoring this little phone for questions you might have. And then following this conversation, downstairs at the lower level, we will have, we'll sell books, cash, check, credit card, we'll take it all. $15 and a portion of each sale today goes to Rock Spring. Laura will be in the Bosman room. We'll be signing books, doing dedications, and we also have a reception outside. I ordered this weather. So what a beautiful day for a reception outside. You're free to get something to eat and drink, come back to get books, go back and forth, etc. So we just want to celebrate this achievement, celebrate your poetry, your ministry, your presence with us, Laura. Can we just give her a round of applause to start it off? Okay, so we're going to get right to it.
Thank you. Let's do it.
And let's do it. So I'm interested in knowing about your origin story, the origin story of your love of poetry and writing, your love of literature. Did poetry start for you as a pastime or an assignment for school? Was it something that just burst forth from you? Or tell us your origin story with poetry and writing.
So I have loved words since I was a child, loved language and books and short stories. However, it might be surprising, I actually didn't write poetry until 10 years ago. And I loved being an English major. I loved other people's words, poetry, but also plays. I wrote a couple of plays. Pam, one of my former bosses, is here. She might remember I wrote a play that we performed when I worked at New Hope Housing. We acted it out when someone was leaving. So I wrote in a lot of different ways, but it was only 10 years ago that I specifically started writing poetry. And I remember being out on a run, and I would describe it as like having these words fall on me. It was like a sense of words were just here. And I went back and I wrote it down, and I decided to share it on Facebook. And that just moment and some of the responses that I got from that were so moving to me. And I remember there were a few people in particular then who really encouraged me to continue writing. And your husband said, Laura, if you think of writing poetry as a spiritual discipline, you will keep doing it. And that was so true. And that was really how the poetry in particular has grown for me.
So, do you do it every day? Where do you get your inspiration? How does that work?
Well, I definitely don't on Sunday mornings. I have other things I'm thinking about when I wake up. But generally, about 5 days a week, my writing process is very much in the morning. I need to wake up and just have coffee is a key part, I think, of a good spiritual routine, at least for me. So having some coffee and having some quiet and starting there. And sometimes I might turn to the lectionary and say, what are the scriptures for the week? And there's, for those of you who aren't familiar with that, there might be, say, a choice of 5 or 6 different scripture possibilities. So I might just read those meditatively and say, what calls to me? Another practice that I do is the examine, which, fun fact, ties into our spiritual practices for seekers offering on Zoom during Lent. That happens to be tonight.
Tonight at 8 o'clock.
That Carolyn is, I'm not leading it tonight. Carolyn Hart is doing tonight's session. But yes. Oh, she's not.
It's all taken care of.
Okay. So tonight's session on the examine or on whatever it is will be great. But so the examine in my life, it's where you look back through, you reflect back through a period of time. And in my case, it would often be the previous day. And you think about the times where you felt God's presence or you felt an experience of joy and connection. And you give thanks for that. And you also look back and you say, was there any place where I missed the mark, where I felt disconnection, where I felt anxiety, and what do I need to let go? And so by starting my day with this silence and this reflection, this is before the headlines, before the emails, it lets me enter into that space of deep listening. I think Parker Palmer is the one who talks about listening to your life. And so the morning is that. And I'll say, I think the importance of any spiritual practice is to be countercultural, right? I'm not trying to end with something to produce. It's listening. And maybe something will be shared and maybe something won't be shared. But either way, there's been something important that's happened. And in this always on productivity output kind of world, I think it's so important for us to do these things that can't be measured and quantified.
I love the title of your book, Breaking into Light. How did you come up with it?
So I think that the words first came to me, I would say sometime, just to be honest, among friends, during the Trump administration. with the sense that here is this apocalyptic time. Climate change, war, women's rights being just rolled back. And for all of that, what I kept feeling through that period of time is it's so important for us to claim what it is that we can do and the ways that we can stand close to the good and the near and the possible. And it made me want to recommit even more deeply. And I remember some of those times, like there was a Muslim ban put into place at a period of time, and I went to Dulles Airport with some others as well to welcome immigrants who were arriving. And so it's this idea that right now, clearly, in our world, we don't have to stretch to see all of the places that are so broken. But the question is, can we enter into them and do something possible and nourishing and fruitful and good? And I believe the answer is every day that we can, and it can be in really small ways that are profound. And so that's an important part of the message, too, of don't ever despair that you can't do anything, because each of us every day can and do stand close to all of this. And so I think about all of it as the light and this idea of collecting the light, right? Many of you might be familiar with the Jewish myth and this call in Judaism called Tikkun Olam, which is this idea that the light was in vases and they shattered. And so the idea is you're repairing the world and you're collecting these pieces of light everywhere. And that's what I see happening every day. And people in this church and in my life who every day participate in some way in the good and the everlasting, which might not last forever, but it's part of this everlasting love in creation.
Thank you for that. In 2017, your poem, Wild Angels, won the Arlington County Moving Words Award. And as a result, the poem ended up on Arlington Transit, right? And I know it has a special, true.
Yes.
On the buses.
Yes.
And I know that poem has a special place in your heart. It's included in this book. I'd love for you to share the backstory to that poem and then read it for us.
And I have to say, the great thing about winning this contest, right, this Moving Words, they printed the poem, they put it on the bus, but you also got to do a poetry reading at a bar at Iota. And so I remember several of you from the church, right? Hugh and Barbara, raise your hands. They were there.
I was there.
It's Sunday after, several people here were there at the bar at 3 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon listening to some poetry. So I like the idea, I continue to play with this idea of contradictions, and that contradictions and paradox they don't have to cancel each other out. Like, that both things can be true at once. A professor in seminary once told me that the opposite of a profound truth is another profound truth. And so living with it, I like to play on these ideas, right? That of words that might seem negative, how do we remake that? Or how do we throw these things together or create a turn or phrase? And I thought, so Wild Angels in particular comes because I'm so inspired by people who break rules sometimes for the good. And they do that in order to feed hungry people, or they do that in order to help pay somebody's rent, and they just work with all the resources that they have and they make something out of it. And I wanted to celebrate that, and then also celebrate the way that we say in the UCC, God is still speaking. And I believe that that is true, and that there are pieces of Scripture that are literally still being written, like sacred Scripture can be the way we live with one another, and that's a part of it. So the version that made it onto the bus had to be consolidated into 10 lines, but in my book, I got to put the full the full one, so I will read that now. Wild angels are my favorite kind. They have no idea where they left their halos, and they let their robes run through fresh mud. They don't stand in formation and sing with a choir. Instead, they show up and change tires on highways, sit down and have a beer and listen, trespass in the park to sit on the swings late at night. They come to hospital rooms to tell bad jokes, to airports to carry heavy bags, to food pantries when it's the end of the month and the money has run out. They believe in revelation unfolding, in the sacred Scripture we write between each other.
Thank you. I could go on with lots of other questions. I have several other questions I could ask, but let's open it up to you. Are there questions that our audience has for Laura?
And I will say we did this format because I personally, for all my love of poetry, I don't love coming and hearing someone read 20 poems in a row. To me, that just loses the intensity and the meaning of them. And so feel free to take the book that way. It can take you 6 months to read this if you want to just read it bit at a time. There's no right or wrong way to approach it. You have
We've got a couple
hands up.
So first of all, congratulations. Two related questions. One, I'd like you to reflect on the process of writing poems versus writing sermons. And then, after you've done that, reflect on what it means to get praise for poems and silence for sermons.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. I would say with all things, it depends on a moment, and that they both involve a creative and sacred process of listening. I appreciate not preaching every week because I think I could not write poetry and preach every week. So I recognize the depth of energy and soul and commitment that is required for a sermon of meaning and value and quality. And I often might integrate, bring in other poets' words into a sermon, and use literature and many other resources as well. I don't know that it's an interesting question, right, so praise for anything, I don't necessarily feel like it's just from me, like my writing is from a deep spiritual place, so if it moves somebody, yes, there's work that we all do in it, but it's the spirit and how each of you might hear some of these words in your heart. So I feel it's less about me in particular and more like I'm this vessel that's a part of it. The silence on sermons I just trust that a big part of faith is that people can hear things that they need to hear in ways that we might never know. And I appreciate, and also if someone tells me that they needed to hear something differently or it didn't work for them, I'm open to hearing that as well, however uncomfortable that might be, because that hopefully makes me a more attuned and aware preacher to hear how things hit or how they land or how they don't land. And I will also say again, a part of faith I think connects to Rock Spring's story and our live streaming, right? Like, we don't know who is watching this on live stream today. Our church services might have 300 people watching. A lot of times we're not going to know who they are or how exactly everything hit them, but there's just a level of trust that there's some words landed on them in some way that they needed, and it's part of a seed. So thank you for that question.
You have one way in the back. Oh, now you have lots of hands up.
And so I have to say, Mark is the one who took my headshot photo. This is not his full-time job. He works for the government by day, but he's also the dog photographer and couples photographer for us. So, Mark, it's so nice to have you here.
Well, likewise, and really the moment is for you. I want to just say first, congratulations, really exciting. Second, I want to just say that your words and reflections for me feed the soul and offer a light in my life. I just want to say that they're absolutely beautiful. And with that in mind, I'm thinking if you could elaborate a little bit more beyond coffee and morning sunshine, how amidst so many difficulties in life and such difficult external environments, you find the courage and the place to find discrete joy and happiness and bring it to others.
I think it's an intention. And I will say, I also believe part of it is not denying what is terrible. Like, I have poems about Ukraine, and how do you write a poem about a war, and injustice, and the murder of black men, just a variety of these really hard issues. And, Hannah recently, maybe it was at your ecclesiastical council or somewhere else, Hannah, you talked so beautifully about not having toxic positivity, because I think that that's a real danger as well. But this idea that part of the faith that I'm part of is rooted in stories like mustard seeds and mud and a man crushing locusts and eating them. And if all that gets to be part of the sacred, then, can't we stand close to it too in ways that we might overlook if we're just rushing? And if we're letting our if we're letting our day be dictated by what somebody has decided the news is, then we miss a lot. But if we start the morning and can look outside and notice a bird and just go back, reflect back on the day before and say, what really fed me in the day? What was that lovely moment that I had? And we try to remember those and capture them in some way. So it's not denying what is terrible, but also saying that doesn't get to outweigh all that is good and near and close and possible. And Hannah is a poet also.
So I'm a really big fan of your poetry, as you know, and I share it with friends and family on a regular basis. And one of the things that you have some themes in your style that come out a lot, and one of them is finding beauty and meaning in the seemingly mundane. And that really comes through a lot, and the importance of observing nature. So I was wondering if you could, those are the things I see when I read your poems, and I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about the themes and the messages that you find yourself consistently trying to send kind of quietly through your poems.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't claim that I have invented anything or come up with anything that is new. I've just put it in, like you said, I do come back to these themes. And the book begins, the first chapter is the sacred ordinary, which is just that, right? The way that washing a plate can be a holy act, or cutting a lemon and serving it to somebody, or giving somebody a ride to church. All of that matters. And so that is very much a theme. I think we have done all of ourselves a disservice if we think the sacred and the secular are separate, because they're intertwined all the time. And we have some great theologians, including a lot of African theologians, who really help us see the connection there. So the book is organized in 5 chapters, starting with the sacred daily, and then also going with justice denied and justice pursued. Liminal spaces. This theme of transitions is one that I come back to a lot, because I think many of us in our life are in transitional seasons a lot, right? Sometimes more than we expect. And the transition could be obvious, from one job to another, or one job to retirement, but it could also be a transition of, oh, this part of my body doesn't work the same way now. What does that mean, to transition in that space? Or what does it mean if you're having a transition in relationship? So just addressing and naming that, and finding some places to hold on to when it feels like everything is moving, is my hope from that. Grief is another theme that I come back to, and I have a chapter of grief poems. And that's meant to be yours, mine, and ours, because while we all have individual grief, we also have a collective grief, whether that has come from COVID or from tragedy. So addressing that, and the grief poems really came because in 2015, my father and grandmother died within 2 months of each other. And before, I think I thought grief was something you sort of get over, right? So you just transform it. And this idea of sitting with it and knowing it, and it has a place at the table whether you want it or not, so what do you do with it, is really important, I think. And especially when we come up with a faith that doesn't just say to somebody who's grieving, well, they're in a better place, so that's the end of the story. When there's more to it than that, we need some language around it. And then the last chapter is To Everything There Is a Season, which is meant to acknowledge certain times, both in the calendar year and then also in the church's year. This certain holidays or certain markers that we can look for.
Other, over here. You see?
So thank you for all the work in putting this together. For your first book of poetry, how did you choose which of your poems would come into this?
That's a great question. So some of them are ones that some of you told me that you printed out and you kept. That's been very meaningful. I've heard from some of you, you have collections or you have folders. Sometimes I've been at a meeting or at an event and somebody's read a poem, and so then that's significant to know if they've read one of mine, to hear what it's meant to them. Certain ones, when I shared them online, clearly resonated with people and were shared and amplified that way. So I took all that into consideration. And then with picking these five themes, I wanted ones that would fit into that, and picked, around 10 for each chapter. So that was part of what I ended up doing.
Donna Moss has her hand up.
Do you have one that is your favorite or you're very emotionally attached? And if you do, could you read it and tell us about it?
My favorite probably depends on the day. Just like a favorite hymn, right? It's what might be speaking to you at a particular moment. So let's just do something fun. Let's do this. Why doesn't somebody call out a number between like 10 and 68? 35. Who said that? Was that you, Charlie?
That was Charlie.
Okay.
I wonder if
Do you
he's
know
got that
what's-
one memorized.
Oh, okay.
he knows
Charlie has been reading a poem a day in the mornings through the book. So this is called If You Are, and this would be an example of one of those that seem to speak to people online. If you are angry, let your anger be fire so it can warm someone chilly. If you are grieving, let your grief be a river so someone thirsty can drink. If you are numb, let your numbness give you capacity to walk in hard places and not feel hurt. If you are broken, let your brokenness be what makes space for a new thing to enter. If you are fearful, let your fear be a warning signal that others may look up. If you are lost, let your being lost make a new place and call it home. However you are, keep going. However you are, keep going. And I wrote that because so many times, right? How many times have you seen someone's angry and they say, oh, just don't be angry, just settle down, just calm down. And does that ever work? And so this idea of turning it and saying, I feel numb. Okay, well, what can you do with that numbness? I feel angry. What can you do with that anger? I just think it's a really important piece, rather than try to deny it or twist it into needing to fit some other box. Honor what it is that you're feeling and say, what do I do with this?
Anybody else? Oh, Hugh.
Just a technical question. At some point, you must have thought putting these on Facebook every day is going to give you a mass of poems to publish in a book. Did the idea of using Facebook every day, when did that start?
I had been on, okay, does anyone remember MySpace? Yes, a few, okay, my colleagues here. So I went through the MySpace to Facebook transition, right? So I had been on it, I don't know when, maybe, 2008, 2009, something, whenever we became Facebooky. And a lot of things went on Facebook at that point. And so then poetry, it was less intentional, like this is where my poems go, but it was more, this is where a lot of things go. And we'll put them there as well. So just using that as a medium to share that. But I want to say that it was through that and comments from so many people that led to the creation of this book, that if I hadn't heard that, and I also want to, again, give credit to Del Dwyer, because he was one of the first people who said that I should publish. And what he seeded in me by doing that was powerful. And it makes me think that all of us should never forget the power that we have with our words to influence other people in a good way. And it doesn't have to be publish a book. It could be make a meal. It could be appreciate the lake, but just the way that we all have that power to lift up other people or to help them see things in themselves that they might have forgotten were there or they might be minimizing.
Is that a hand in the back? Andrew, were you just stretching or? Oh, but we've got Carol Moreland here. You get a microphone.
Well, Laura, it's so nice to be here at this celebration for you and your beautiful poetry. I was wondering, you said you started writing poems about 10 years ago. I just wondered if you see a development through the years as you keep writing and get different reactions. Do you look back 10 years and see that you've changed much in terms of how you write or what you write?
That's a great question. I think 10 years ago, I might have wanted to pull out more English major words than I do now. And now I really want poems to be accessible. Sometimes I'll hear a poem, and a lot of these are very popular, right? It's sort of the, like, I smoked my last cigarette underneath a fig and I died on the street corner sorts of poems. And that's not what I write, but they say it with 15 layers of existential despair. And that's not my voice. And so I appreciate and take example from other people who write with really clear voices, and they're not afraid to. Mary Oliver, if something's blue, she will say it's blue. And so that's a change that I've had. I will also say that another change has been a professor in seminary, Sathi Clark, who led our immersion to India. One time he wrote on a paper, I'd written something, and he wrote about how I had written about hope, but he said also that hope misapplied can be delusional. And I appreciated that. And so he has helped me to say, yes, I have hope, but the hope is in right now, and the hope isn't delusional. It is acknowledging all that is and not making it false, but making it authentic into that space. So I would say that is another piece that just has been tempered over time.
We've got 2 more questions, and then that'll... Sarah and then Pam.
Carol's question and your answer leads me to this question, which is, we know something about where you grew up in school and all, and I'm curious as to what poets you studied in school. And of course, we all know too that the humanities are now under challenge, and so I know there's trends in poetry over time, so I'm curious about what you were studying when you were growing up.
So I'm trying to think back to like elementary school, right, and high school, and then college, and who I studied in particular of the poets. I mean, I certainly took a class on Shakespeare. One of the classes that in seminary, actually, that had a profound impact on me, and this is a special connection Sarah and I share, was a class called T.S. Eliot and God. Sarah has written about Emily Hale, and we can recommend her book as well. Have a follow-up conversation with her on that. So that class was impactful. I also took a visionary poets class, and we studied Emily Dickinson, William Blake in that class as well. And Eliot was also in that class. I think it's significant too, though, who we didn't study as much, right? Whose voices were left out, and looking at it now, like Joy Harjo, fantastic indigenous poet, wasn't a part of that conversation. Lucille Clifton, I can think about so many others who were left out. And so who do we need to be reading and studying and paying attention to now is a big part of it also.
Okay, and Pam.
Laura, first of all, let me add my congratulations. I'm so excited that you have put this book out, and I'm so excited to read it. And selfishly, I am thinking, oh, God, there have been so many prayers, and I just hope they made it into the book because they were poetry spoken for all of us, a poetry reading every Sunday. You lead us in prayer, so thank you for that. And so my question is, I know, Alan talked about this being your first. There's stuff on the cutting room floor. Tell us that you're gonna, think about the themes for the next one, even as you are basking in the glow of getting this project out the door.
Yeah, I have to keep writing. That's really how I ground myself, is by that. So I am continuing to write and to create. And the beautiful part is right now I can enjoy the book being out, focus on the writing, and to just take some time with this and not immediately be in production mode again. I have learned so much from this experience about what it takes to bring a book to life. I have a website now, so I'm able to just have that as a non-Facebook way to connect and communicate, and a mailing list through that, which all gives me just a place to be and a community and a place to come back to. And part of it will be hearing from all of you, right? As you read this book, what do you want more of? What isn't in here that you would want to hear? All of that matters, and I can't imagine not writing. Just, again, as I said, it really helps me stand up and be steady on the world and hold that there's space for the contradictions.
So before we go on to the next, you're going to give us instructions for the next phase. I just want to name, I'm sure I'm not the only one here feeling this. This feels like such a sacred moment. To see you, to experience you living into this vision with such clarity and groundedness, using your voice. We at Rock Spring are blessed by that week in and week out. But for me, just listening to what's behind it all, what inspires her, what keeps you grounded, that feels so sacred. And thank you. Thank you for using your voice, risking putting it out there, and sharing it with us today.
Well, and thank you for making the space for that. Kathy has been an encourager, and she understands that my poet soul can't go to the finance board meeting, for example. So I just want to name the way you have so beautifully made space for me to be who I am in ministry, and created that with so much love and sincerity here, and how you've been a part of all of this.
It's my joy. So tell us what's coming next.
Okay, so the incomparable Cheryl Ramp has created an outdoor festival spirit for us with drinks and some light bites. So we have, as Kathy said, she ordered us up a beautiful day. So we'll invite you to go outside, get something delicious, say hello to people, linger there. We want to first let anybody who is immunocompromised or vulnerable come down first to get their book and get it signed. So, how is that going to work, you say? Well, let me point out, where is Diana? Okay, so if you want to pay with credit card, Diana is going to set up 2 computers for Rock Spring credit card payments. It's very straightforward, and no, because Charlie asked me, this will not put you on the church's email list, so it's okay. Totally separate transaction.
Although if you'd like to be on,
Yeah.
we'd welcome you.
Charlie will be handling the cash and check payments here, my husband Charlie. So Diana will be in the little nook as you enter Sagmauler with the couches. Charlie will be by the big table that used to be the hospitality table for any cash or check. And I want to say, if for any reason just paying for this does not work for you, please come and get a book anyway. No questions asked. Just get your book. We want you to have it. So please take that with you. Then you can see my friend Melissa. Melissa has flown in from New York. She was one of my bridesmaids, a friend from college. Melissa will be handing out books to you, and we'll want to make sure in all of this that the books are in fact blank and not signed when you get them, so we'll just review that. Some of you have already been in touch with me about dedications, and I've already pre-signed, and I have them in the Bosman room. So you get your book, and then you can bring it to me to sign, or you can come see me, and you can pick up your book from there. And so we'll just, again, linger indoors, out, we'll move through it, but I did want to make sure that anybody who is feeling vulnerable, wanting to not be around a crowd, can go ahead and get their book signed first.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.